Hello and welcome back to Beyond Sunday Podcast. This is another parenting edition. It's actually session 5 of the Broccoli series. If you haven't listened to sessions 1 through 4, go back, listen to those first because they all work together and lead us to this point where we are at with session 5, again, with Dr. Tim Riley, who wrote the book, first the broccoli, then the ice cream, a new edition coming out later this year. Tim, welcome back to the Parenting Podcast, Beyond Sunday. And Dr. Tim, tell us something new. Tell us something new about you that has to do with either your credentials or something that you've been able to do in your job as a child psychologist.
I hope I've been able to do quite a bit in my job as a child psychologist, but or psychologist in general. Most of it I can't talk about because it's confidential. So I've been professor of pediatrics. I've taught at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, UNO, at Bellevue University. I've been a consulting psychologist at the Omaha Home for Boys. Did a lot of work with them on program development as well as working with individual kids, and I've managed to get 3 kids out of my house.
There you go, which is our goal. To get the kids out of our house. It was a strange goal when we first heard it, but as we've learned more about intentional parenting, being consistent with our kids, regardless of the unique personality God has given us, we're starting to learn. I know I'm learning what this goal really is about getting our kids out of our house in a way that they are ready to take on the world and not floundering and scared like a helpless leaf in the wind. So today we're going to jump into, we just learned the 4 really, truly useful principles. And then the next part in your book, this is just the most ridiculous thing. We're going to jump into the 4, actually 5, truly important distinctions. So some of the most ridiculous titles, but great content here. So, but before we get into these 4, you kind of talk about punishment versus discipline.
Yeah, that's the first distinction, and I want to start that with an idea from Scripture, and that's this: don't be stupid.
Where do you find that in Scripture?
I find that in Proverbs 12:1.
All right, let's hear it.
Whoever loves discipline loves knowledge, but whoever hates correction is stupid.
Stupid.
Stupid is not a word you find in the Bible a lot, but it's
yeah, I wonder what the original Hebrew for that, what that is.
So what we're really talking about here, when basically everything that we're talking about is discipline, but I think it's important to make a distinction and be clear about what we're talking about when we're talking about discipline. A lot of people get stuck on the idea of discipline and believe that discipline and punishment are the same thing. And punishment can be included in discipline, often is, but doesn't have to be. The idea of discipline is training or teaching. It's an activity that develops, corrects, or improves a skill. It's not just punishment. So when we're talking about correction, we're not talking about, I'm going to stuff some bad behavior you're doing. I'm going to teach you something good and productive and useful. If the bad behavior gets in the way, we'll deal with that, but that's not the end of what we're doing. The goal is every disciplinary interaction involves me teaching you something productive and positive.
Right. Well, and you think about discipline, disciple, someone who's learning. And as Christians, we know about the disciples, the people who followed Jesus and learned from him on the daily. And we too are disciples of Jesus. We're disciples of God's word as we learn from God's word not to be stupid. And we ought to be disciples of parenting, that we're constantly learning. We don't think we have it all figured out, and that it's a process more so than a one-time fix.
Yeah. So I mean, discipline is not involved in training or teaching. Discipline is training or teaching. certainly my parents' generation tended to get stuck on the idea of punishment a lot. And I think that's an important distinction to make before we launch in any. So that's the free number 5 distinction.
So that's number 5. So going back to number 1, this is like Star Wars. So truly important distinction number 1.
The Empire Strikes Back.
The Empire Strikes Back, yes. Education versus training.
Yeah, so imagine that you wanted to teach me to play the piano.
Teach you.
Yeah. Wow. Imagine that. And so you say, Tim, here's a book about piano. I want you to learn all of the keys. I want you to learn what notes go with the keys. I want you to learn what the pedals do. And here's some video of some of the great piano concertos played by some of the all-time great pianists.
Yes.
And I can do all of that, and I can study it diligently, and I can know everything, and I still don't know how to play the piano a lick. I'm educated, but I'm not trained.
Oh.
Training requires me to do something. It requires me to have the experience of sitting down at the piano, playing, getting some feedback on my actions. So when I play notes that sound good, right, that go together, that's positive feedback or reinforcement that we talked about last time. When I play, as I'm prone to do on guitar and mandolin, notes that don't sound so good.
Whatever. You're pretty consistent.
Then that's another kind of feedback, and that helps me know what not to do. But there is no version of learning to play the piano that doesn't involve playing the piano.
Right.
You can't educate me into doing it. And parents often fall on the side of trying to explain things and talk to their kids and lecture their kids about things rather than helping them just have the experiences that will actually demonstrate, what it is that we want from them. So we talked about kids learning from their experiences. That's really what's required in training.
Got it. And that's also why we've all had those teachers who were just brilliant. Like they knew the material inside and out. Maybe they were the leading whatever in their field, but then like couldn't teach worth a lick.
Right.
Because they weren't able to get their incredible knowledge into a way that actually trained us to learn about it or gave us practical principles on doing it.
Right.
So we can do that as parents too. So that's something with this. As you're listening to this podcast, don't expect that you'll just infuse these things and know them and now you'll be a great parent. You actually have to put them into practice. There's a biblical principle in there as well. There's a Bible verse, I forget which one it says, but it says, do not merely listen to the word and so deceive yourself. Do what it says. Same thing in parenting. Don't merely listen to these guides, these principles, and deceive yourself. No, actually put them into practice daily.
Right. So far you've been educated, but not necessarily trained. I mean, I've actually heard parents say something like, I've told you this 500 times, and you're still not doing it. It's okay. Well, the 501st time is not going to be more effective than the first 500.
What if I say it louder?
Or louder or longer or whatever, right? It's like do something to help them learn by changing their environment if they do or don't understand. As parents, we're stuck in a position of having to do things for kids or do things to kids that it doesn't matter how much we try to explain it to them. I mean, you talked about trying to explain, shootings to your son.
Right.
You can explain that all day. He's not going to get it. I'm not sure I get it.
Yeah.
But he's certainly not going to get it. And sometimes we just have to do things because they just need to be done. So you take your kids and you get them shots. You let doctors do things to them that are painful and uncomfortable because in the long run, there's a benefit to this. There's no way to explain to an infant why you're going to let them get a shot.
Yeah.
You just have to do it because it needs to be done.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes kids, so there are times when they just need to listen and obey, and we don't have to explain everything to them.
Yeah. And there's probably good guidance for adults in that too. Sometimes we just need to listen and obey whether we understand it or not.
Which is easier for some people more than others.
Yeah. So education is good, but it's not enough.
Right. So really, truly important distinction number 2, you talk about jumping in versus jumping ahead.
Yeah. So, again, when kids are younger, we have to jump in a lot, right? If the toddler is heading for the top of the stairs, we jump in and stop them from going there. If they are going to stick a fork in the outlet, we stop them from doing that. We don't let them pull the dog's ear. We get between them and the potential consequences of their actions because they're not aware enough to do that for themselves. The problem comes in when we keep doing that or doing that at times that are inappropriate. So we put ourselves between kids and richly deserved consequences. So, we've used the term a lot of times already, helicopter parents or whatever. I mean, I have parents who, I have a parent I will see next week who has interfered with their child's legal issues time after time after time after time. And because they do it, the behavior continues to escalate. The behavior gets worse. And eventually they won't be able to do that anymore. And the consequences are going to be horrible. So jumping in is putting ourselves between the kids and consequences. And it's fine as long as those consequences are potentially harmful to the kid. But when we get in the way of things that are just going to be uncomfortable or a little bit painful because we don't want to have to deal with that, then we do them a disservice. And so the example I use is, a kid learning to ride bike without the training wheels for the first time, and the parents running along next to them, grabbing the seat every time they wobble a little bit. At some point, the kid has to ride the bike. At some point, you have to let go. And the risk in doing that is they're going to fall down and they're going to scrape their knee. So instead of jumping in and stopping that every single time, you jump ahead and say, I will be there to pick them up when they fall down. I'll be there with the wet washcloth and the Band-Aid and some encouragement and keep them going. But they have to ride the bike. I can't ride the bike for them any more than I can make them stronger by lifting weights for them. This is something they have to do on their own. So the parent who looks ahead sees the consequence coming, but can see that it's going to be painful, it's going to be uncomfortable, but it's not going to harm you, and you're going to learn a bunch from this. That's a parent who's jumping ahead.
Yeah, we talked about successful failure in one of the earlier episodes, and allowing our kids to experience discomfort because we know that it's going to benefit them in the long run. It's kind of nature's way of educating them as well. So jumping in versus jumping ahead, we ought to be people who jump ahead.
Yeah.
Think about the long term rather than just the immediate for our children.
Yeah, and that's kind of counter to the way the culture operates now, right? Which is to insulate kids from consequences, insulate ourselves from consequences, to get in the way of that, to make the kids, consultants. In what goes on in their life, instead of just like, you know what, I know stuff. I'm an adult. I've been around the block. You need to listen to me just because you need to listen to me. And I can't explain why, because you're not ready to learn it yet. So that's the way it's going to go.
So I had an example of this. So in 2017, we had a house fire, and it was traumatic and wild and whatever. The very next day, I had a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old at the time. And I was like, what do I do? Like, they need to know why we're not going to be in our home for a long time. We didn't know how long it would be. It ended up being 9.5 months. And so the very next day, I took my 3-year-old and 1-year-old back to the house.
I was nowhere near your house, by the way, before that fire.
No, okay, good. It's not on you. I think I chased a possum out of my garage. So I think it was possum
Did the possum
arson.
have matches with them?
Yes, I think so. I think the possum, because they never truly found out what it was. Their best guess was electrical, but I don't know. We don't really know what was the cause, so I think it was possum arson. Anyway, I bring my kids back to the house and walk them through, and they get to see why they don't have their toys and why they'll be living in another house and why they don't have their chair and so on and so forth. And then I went to basketball a couple days later, and one of the guys said, so what are you going to tell your kids? I said, well, I've already told them. I brought them through the house. I showed them. And they said, oh, I would never do that. And What would you do? Well, I would just tell them that we're living in another house for a little while to have some fun with it. And that was such a bizarre way of thinking for me. And now I'm learning the reason that was bizarre for me is that'd be a way of jumping in to try to like save them from the discomfort of the reality. Whereas for me, I wanted to jump ahead so that they knew why we weren't going to be there for a long time. And it wasn't because we're just having fun somewhere else.
Yeah.
It's because something really wild just happened. And that's like, no, you're not going to get your whatever it was, your toy back next week or the week after that or the month after that. No, it's gone forever.
And oh, by the way, we're okay.
Yeah. And we're going to get to pick out appliances together. Just you wait.
Every kid's dream.
They love doing that.
Yeah. Little kids love stainless steel.
What type of finish you want on this handle, Benton? So truly important distinction. Number one, it was education versus training. Number two, it was jumping in versus jumping ahead.
Yeah.
And number three, active noncompliance versus passive noncompliance. I mentioned in an earlier episode that one of my daughters is kind of experiencing both of those right now. So I'm really excited to learn about this. Active noncompliance versus passive.
So the easiest way to talk about this is to tell a story again from one of my clinical experiences.
Love it.
We had this clinic in Columbus. I worked with the hospital out there in a pediatric group, and it was set up as a teaching place. It had a little house that the hospital owned. They remodeled for me, so it had an observation window, and my clinic rooms were the former bedrooms. So it was this nice little setup, and I would take students with me, psychology students, medical students with me to observe what was going on. So this little girl comes in, Alyssa. She's 4 or 5 years old. Pretty great kid. This is like one of my all-time favorite kids. And so I'm just checking to see how she does with compliance, right? Can she follow instructions? Can she not follow instructions? Because if a kid won't follow instructions, it's hard to get them to do anything else. So I knock over some blocks and the little like Legos in this container and say, Alyssa, please pick those up. Nothing. No response. She just gives me a blank stare. So I put her in timeout. Couple minutes, I get her up, grab her by the hand and say, Alyssa, please pick up the blocks now. Nothing. Another time out, another 2 minutes, I get her out. The third time, I take her by the hand and say, Alyssa, please pick up the blocks now. And she looks me dead in the eye. She folds her arms. She stands up straight and says, face it, I'm not picking them up. So I put her in timeout again, except this time I get her out. I take her little hand in mine and I grab the block with both of our hands and we put the block in a container. And I'm like, Alyssa, thank you so much for doing that. You're doing such a great job. And we do that 5 or 6 more times. And eventually she starts picking up the blocks herself. And every single time I'm praising her for doing that. And then she got all done with that. And I kicked over the container again. I said, now pick them up again. And she did.
So,
and every single one she picked up, I congratulated her. I thanked her for doing that. And we understood each other at that point, and we got along pretty well from then on.
So that's an example of active noncompliance. It's pretty obvious. Toddlers do this all the time.
Yeah, she was not in any way shy or guarded about. She was clear about what her intentions were. I am not listening to you. I'm not going to make me. And some kids do that. Toddlers are particularly good at that.
Yeah.
Most toddlers. But that's not what every kid does. And one of the main reasons they don't do that is that most parents won't tolerate that.
Right.
They will react in a big way. If your kid says, no, I'm not doing it, usually that's going to get a response from the parent. So kids learn an alternative approach. You can think back to a session or two ago, we talked about Josh, the kid who's downstairs watching TV, and dad comes to the top of the stairs and says, Josh, time to go to bed now. And Josh says, okay, dad.
But doesn't do it.
So he appears to be compliant. He's making noise like he's compliant, but he doesn't follow through.
Passive noncompliance?
Passive noncompliance. So when kids act that way, I mean, they learn to not be actively non-compliant because a parent will respond and they learn to stall or to agree to do something and then never do it. I'll do it as soon as I'm done watching this show or when I get to the next level in my video game or whatever. And maybe they get out of doing it altogether because a parent gets distracted and forgets. At the very least, they get to keep doing what they wanted to do for a little bit longer. And if there isn't some meaningful compliance attached to that or a consequence attached to that, then they'll keep doing it.
Right.
The biggest point is that active noncompliance and passive noncompliance produce exactly the same result.
Okay.
You're not listening to me, right? The kid learns to be sneakier about it, learns to be more underground about it, but they're still being noncompliant. And if there's one thing that should be part, in my opinion anyway, of every parent's playbook, it's that you need to listen to me. If a kid can't be compliant, you have very little chance of teaching them anything else that's useful.
Okay. So whether it's active or passive noncompliance, we still need to take action on it just because they seemed obedient, but then later we found out that they were sneaking around and still being noncompliant. They still need to be called out on it.
Yeah.
We can't congratulate them for being sneaky.
Gravity, 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 gravity.
Be like gravity. So you had another story in your book about Olivia. And I thought this was an awesome example of the passive noncompliance.
So Olivia was a little kid, probably in that similar age range, maybe 4 or 5 years old. And unfortunately, she had some developmental issues and she did not speak at all. She was mute. So, parents had a variety of behaviors they were working on, how are we going to manage language, all of those kind of things. And because I think compliance is an important thing, I asked the parents, well, how does she do following directions? And they looked at me like I was stupid. That happens to me a lot now that I think about it. And they said, well, she doesn't speak. And I said, okay. But how does she do following directions? She doesn't speak. She doesn't know how to speak. I said, okay, well, Olivia, here. And there was this, one of those little wooden puzzle things with the little pieces on the handle. And I said, here, give this to your dad. And she gave me basically the same look her parents did, which was that like, what are you, stupid?
Yeah.
And did nothing. So I put her in timeout. I said, you're not listening.
Wow, which might have seemed cruel to the parents.
Yeah, and the parents were like, I think probably horrified at that point. And then I got her out of timeout and I handed her the piece again and I said, give this to your dad. And she did. She walked right over to him and handed it to him. She was perfectly capable of doing that,
right.
But everybody had assumed she was not. So they didn't ask anything of her. They had deprived her of a lot of learning because they didn't really ask her to do anything. They just assumed that she was incapable of it. So my basic rule is I assume a kid is capable of anything until they can demonstrate convincingly to me that they're not.
So whether it's passive or active noncompliance, it should always be corrected. It requires immediate and assertive response. Intentional parenting, be like gravity. Which brings us to our truly important distinction. Number 4, can't do versus won't do.
Yeah. So there was never a time in my life where I was going to be a Major League Baseball player. I had the potential to do that. Wouldn't matter how much training I got, how much coaching I got, how much money I invested.
What if you really believed?
It wouldn't matter how much I believed. It wouldn't matter how much I dreamed and prayed and worked at it. No matter how many hours I spent in the batting cage, I didn't have the raw material to be able to do that.
Okay.
I can't do it. And there are some things for some kids that are legitimate can't do problems.
Right.
I can't do this because I've got some developmental issue. So for Olivia, it didn't matter how much of a reward was offered or how much of a punishment might have been threatened. She wasn't going to talk. And there are a variety of reasons, kids or adults for that matter, might not be able to do something. So but when we think about kids, we think about skill deficits. So sometimes we ask kids to do things they're just not up to. or we ask them to consider why their behavior was what it was, or we ask them to think about things that their little brains just aren't ready for.
Right. And we can connect with that as parents as well. You get a new job and you just haven't learned how to do something.
Exactly.
And they're like, hey, we need you to input these things into Clearstream or whatever program you're using. And you're like, I don't even know what Clearstream is.
So you can imagine what it'd be like to have somebody keep telling you to do that, but never train you with the skill set that you need to do it. And that's what happens with kids. Why do you keep acting like that? You keep doing that. I keep telling you not to. And maybe the kid doesn't know the skill they need to be able to accomplish it. But since you assume they do, then they think, well, I should know how to do this because dad thinks I should know how to do it. And then they end up like feeling bad about themselves or whatever as a result of that.
And these are some of my favorite light bulb moments with my kids. My oldest son.
Light bulb moment is particularly appropriate.
Yeah. One of my favorite light bulb moments with my oldest son is he's a really good listener. He gets frustrated about things, but he's a really good listener. So he was frustrated because kids at school kept during recess, which is my son's most important time of the day, they would yell at him or say, that's a terrible throw, and he didn't like that. But what he was doing with that behavior is he just brought it home. So when we'd play catch in the backyard, I made a bad throw, he'd say, that's a terrible throw. And I said, Benton, I don't want to play catch with you if you're going to just tell me that I'm doing terribly. And he said, and it was interesting, he said, that's what my friends tell me at school. I said, oh, okay. I said, so just like I told you, I don't want to play catch with you if you're going to talk to me like that. You can tell your friends that at school. And he didn't say, okay, Dad. He just was quiet and he listened.
Yeah.
So then the next day I said, how's recess? And he said, well, my friend said I was terrible. I said, oh, what'd you do? I told him that I don't want to play with them if they're telling me I'm terrible. What did they do? They didn't say I was terrible again.
Yeah.
And I was like, yes, I did something right. But it was something that he needed to learn those words.
Yeah. And an extension of that is I also don't let kids say those things about themselves.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
You're not allowed to say negative things about yourself that I wouldn't allow you to say about somebody else.
Right. Yeah. And find different words. And that we had that same talk because he'd be like, I'm terrible. And I'm like, Benton, are you terrible? No, I'm not actually terrible. But when you say that, that's not good for you. So I'm fine with you saying I'm frustrated.
Yeah.
Because that's more accurate. That's kinder.
Yeah. I mean, and that's, I mean, giving kids directions for things and then not doing them yourself it is, again, that goes back to the issue of consistency. Well, if I tell you to behave like this, but I'm not behaving that way.
That's a great point.
Same thing. I mean, lack of consistency.
Yeah, and we see that as adults too, where we'll put ourselves down and so stupid. Stupid. Why did I do that? I'm so stupid.
Yeah, I mean I've done this,
right, 3 times today already. Yeah. I've seen it.
So a skill deficit, right? Is that I could do it, I just don't know how to do it.
Right,
yet. I haven't been trained. For kids in particular, as they develop, sometimes there's a maturity deficit.
Okay.
They're going to be able to do it at some point, but they haven't developed it far enough yet. And again, I think there's some cultural influence here. We'll talk about this later on as kind of the space between adult and kid gets blurred. We end up expecting kids to have a level of knowledge and understanding that they just don't have.
Right.
And then we expect these behaviors out of them, and then they're not equipped for it yet. So sometimes we just have to wait and let the maturity happen and develop, and then we can train them with the skills.
So there's a skill deficit, a maturity deficit, and then there's a third one in your book, a true deficit.
Yeah, and some kids, like the kiddo Olivia, who couldn't speak, I mean, that's a legitimate deficit.
Sure.
Some kids have developmental issues that they're not going to recover from. We don't ask a kid with an orthopedic impairment to to be the fastest runner in the class, right?
Right.
Those are the times when we look for ways to accommodate those issues or look for alternative ways to manage those rather than just demanding a particular kind of behavior. And sometimes that's a good time to get a professional involved.
So these are the can't do problems. What are the won't do problems?
Right. So, as part of my practice, I have encountered lots of kids who have can't do issues, right? They've got developmental issues or medical issues or whatever. That's some kids. I don't think I have ever met a kid who doesn't have some won't do in them.
Okay.
And won't do is, I'm not doing this just because I don't want to.
Right.
And so if we think back of the example of Olivia, the kiddo who wouldn't hand the piece to her dad,
Yes.
she was perfectly capable of doing it. She understood the command. She had the necessary skills to be able to do it. She just didn't want to. And that accounts for a lot of child behavior. You talked about your daughter wanting to go outside and you told her she needed to stay in. Well, she didn't want to stay in.
Right.
And so she went outside. Those are behaviors that need to be corrected, right? So the problem is we can't tell what's a can't do problem until we deal with the won't do problems.
Okay.
I don't know how many jumping jacks you can do if I can't get you out of that chair. You can tell me you know your math facts, but until I give you a test, I don't know that you know your math facts. I could tell you I know how to play the piano, but until you sit me down in front of the piano and have me do it, you have no way to tell whether or not I'm telling you the truth. Won't do is a consistent problem throughout childhood. But if I had said to Olivia's parents, okay, fine, we're not going to ask her to do anything, I would have shortchanged that kid.
Yeah.
Because she would never have learned a lot of skills that she otherwise did because nobody demanded of her that she tried to do that and tried to motivate her to exceed her reach a little bit. If we're not doing that with our kids, if we're not challenging our kids, then we're doing them a disservice.
So as a listener, though, I'm hearing this and I'm like, okay, this makes sense. This is helpful. But how do I sort out what's a won't do and what's a can't do? This feels like a bigger conversation.
Yeah, and that's really the next sort of big topic and the one that's going to get us really into the meat of like, okay, we've got this information, we've got this knowledge, we've learned some new stuff, and we've been able to draw diagrams with C's and R's and triangles and all of that. But what do we do?
Right.
The sorting out can't do from won't do is a question of motivation. If I can get you out of your chair trying to do some jumping jacks, then I will know how many you can do. If I can find a way to motivate you to give your best effort at solving math problems, then I will know what kind of math you can actually do. And that's really where motivation comes in.
So are you saying that in our next session, session six, I believe, coming up, we're going to actually get into the discovery mode of what our kids can't do or what our kids won't do, and which will help us learn how to better motivate them to do the things that we desire them to do?
Yeah.
Whoa, it's coming together.
We're going to shift gears into some more, like finally at chapter or episode 6, get into some of the practical do this.
Yeah. So folks, if you've been with us through all these sessions, 1 through 5, and you're like, when are we going to get to something? I mean, like I've taken some great tidbits here and I've retooled my mind, but I actually want to see results. If you haven't seen those yet, which I bet you've seen some of those, but we're going to see more as we continue. There's some groundwork that's been laid. Some takeaways from this session, session 5. 1, don't be stupid, right? This is a biblical takeaway from
always good
Dr.
advice,
Tim.
yeah.
Don't be stupid. Another takeaway for me is was just like these truly important distinctions. The one that really stood out to me, although they all did, was jumping in versus jumping ahead, thinking like allowing my kid, because I'm teaching one of my kids to ride their bike right now, and I'm holding on to that chair too long. They're going to be okay. Have the
trick
Band-Aids.
is to
have it ready.
know when is the right moment to let go.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So that was a good takeaway for me. Tim, what's one more takeaway from you?
I like those. I mean, to me, those are the primary things. But we're going to keep going back to. I'm going to keep pounding on the idea. You got to be aware of where your kid is developmentally, and make sure that what you're asking them to do is within their reach, rather than demanding that they do things that they're not ready to do yet, and then being upset when they can't do them. Like if I ask you to start speaking Russian and you don't do it, I can either be mad at you for not doing it, or I can teach you how to speak Russian, right?
Right. Well, and then finding out, when are they be non-compliant and when can they just not be able to do it? And if they can do it and they're actively or passively being non-compliant, to correct that each time, every time, be like gravity.
Yeah, I'm always going to default on the side of you can do this.
Yeah.
Right. And sometimes there are a lot of reasons, and kids get reinforced for saying, I can't do it. I need help. I need whatever. My default position is, I believe you can do this. Let's find out. And the way that we're going to find out is by increasing the motivation.
Right. When we look into God's word, we read that I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. That doesn't mean that we can pick up the boulder that's heavier than we are or whatever, but we can battle through. We can do hard things, not because we are truly mighty, but because we serve a God who truly is mighty, and because what Christ has done for us, died, rose for us. He's given us new life and new reason for us to be intentional, to work really hard, to do this well, so that one day our kids can go out and do the very same thing. So thanks for tuning in to another session of the Parenting Podcast on Beyond Sunday. We will see you for session 6. We're going to keep this thing moving.